Hi, so it's that time again. A new raid tier is upon us. Antorus the Burning Throne is going to be out very soon. And people are wanting to find out, oh, how is my spec doing? How is my class doing? Do I need to change things? Usual things. People are looking for the old DPS comparison sims. There they are in all their misplaced glory. Now, when Tomb of Sargeras was upon us, I did a video on why you should ignore those. Completely put them in the bin. But what I'm going to do in this video is just to build on that with a few practical examples, just to highlight how they're not actually giving you any information at all that is of any value to you. So first of all, let's go back to those Tomb of Sargeras ones that came out. We have a look at them, and I'm just going to bring them up. So, what did we have at the top? Oh, look, Marksmanship Hunters. Ooh, nice. Marksmanship Hunters are going to blow the field away. Now, let's have a look at some actual Warcraft logs. This isn't bang up to date, by the way. This is pre-7.3, because, of course, in 7.3, changed the game completely with the likes of the Netherlight Crucible and the, you know, the vendor that we can get 9-10 items from. So, this is 7.2.5. Now, what we can see is Marksmanship Hunters, they're fine. They're okay. They're not at the top, and they're not actually close to the top. And I don't just mean in position. There's some significant way off what is billed to be at the top of all this thing. Now, of course, you'll see in these sims, it doesn't have absolutely every spec in there, because that's another thing sometimes you see on these comparison specs. It doesn't always have every spec on it, because the people who are building it up need a profile. They can't create themselves. And that's another key thing. The people who make these things don't usually know very much about lots of specs, certainly not enough to be able to come up with a sensible profile for each one. So they're reliant upon individual classes and specs theory crafters putting a profile on, like Simcraft or something like that. So there's no Warlock ones there at all. But we can see in terms of ones that it was compared to, for example, so we can see Shadow Priest. Shadow Priest screaming ahead of Marksmanship Hunters in terms of what was actually done. So why is this? Well, the answer's simple. The sims are done for a patchwork fight for a given amount of time. That means you're standing still, you're planting your feet, you're using your DPS cooldowns on cooldown, you're using trinkets at the most sensible time, you're not moving, there's no ads or anything like that. In reality, sometimes there are ads, sometimes you have to switch targets, sometimes you have to move and do no DPS, sometimes you have to hold on to your DPS cooldowns for a more important part of the fight. All of these sorts of things will affect it. So what we're seeing on the actual logs is a much more realistic representation of how the specs can actually perform on those fights. There are some caveats to that, but that's a topic for another video. So ones who may be able to do all right damage, but they're really good at doing that damage on the move, are going to look a little bit better. So, you know, you've got a realistic situation there, which is different to what the sims are showing. So now if we look at the sims that are floating around for tier 21. Okay, which again doesn't necessarily have every spec on there. Again, Warlocks seem to be notable by their absence on this set. There may be other ones, of course, floating around. So you look at this. First of all, it looks like the DPS values are really high. That's immediately suspicious. You look at that and you're thinking, wow, 2.5 million. Ooh, this Antorus gear is pretty good. I can't wait for in a few weeks' time my DPS suddenly goes up by 1 million. But then you have a look at it in reality and you think to yourself, okay, so what's the gear that they've given it? What's in the profile? It's pretty good mythic gear. It's all mythic Antorus gear, and some of that mythic gear is actually Warforged. So it's assuming a little bit of luck as well. Well, that's not terribly realistic in the first few weeks. This is the sort of gear that you might have after 2 or 3 months. Now, that's not very good for us. A couple of reasons. First of all, Blizzard will inevitably change things. They'll change things about the set bonuses, potentially. They may change things about certain classes. They might fiddle with talents. They might put something else in the game that gives us a boost as well halfway through the raid tier. This is standard. This has been standard procedure in Legion. We think they're going to change things before it even launches. So we can only really think about the first few weeks. In the first few weeks, we're not getting up to 970 odd item level, which is what this is. So what we should do really is put it in a mixture of like normal and heroic gear, which is what I'm going to do in a moment in a little exercise. Then the other thing is we look at it and it uses legendaries. It uses 2 legendaries as you would. but it may not be the 2 legendaries you use. The other thing is the gear is entirely from Antorus. Entirely from Antorus. It ignores the fact that you may well have Titan Forge gear from Tomb of Sargeras. I mean, I'm not giving up my 950 tier gloves from Tomb of Sargeras until I get a significantly better piece from, or even just a better piece from Antorus, which may not happen straight away. Also, it's only uses the 4 set tier 21. Well, what if, as a spec, your 2 set tier 20 is pretty good? What if, and this is the case at the moment, your 4 set tier 20 and 2 set tier 21 are really good as well? But however you mix it around, what if a effective 6 set bonus is actually really good for you? It doesn't use it, and it'll be better for some specs than others. So let's have a look at a little exercise. So what I did is, I can't do this for every spec because I don't know every spec well enough to be able to do this. I would just, you know, I'd be making all sorts of errors. But I'll do it with the Retribution Paladin because I looked at the profile for that. Now, first of all, what I've done is reduce the item level down to get it to sensible DPS levels. I've thought to myself, well, after a few weeks, I should be able to have access to most of the Antorus pieces that I would want at normal or heroic. And so that's what I did. I gave myself a mixture of normal and heroic. I leant more towards the heroic. I'm going to hope that, especially with the use of split runs, that I can get more heroic pieces than normal gears after a few weeks. So I reduced it down that. The other thing I did is there's a Path of the Titans trinkets used as we'd want, because the Path of the Titans effect is very strong. So regardless of what we think about the actual trinket effect itself, maybe good, maybe bad for your spec, the Path of the Titans effect is good, so we sort of want one of those. But the profiles all set it at item level 1000. Now you can build it up to item level 1000, but it takes you 12 weeks at least to do that. You've got to kill Argus the Unmaker 12 times on some difficulty to get the tokens to improve the item level of it. So that's not happening in the first few weeks. So I increased it to 960 item level, what we'd get it to after, say, the first 4 weeks. So then what I did is I worked out the DPS of that, and it came to a much more sensible 1.8 million DPS. Significant increase on what I'm simming at the moment. Very nice. So then what I did is I looked at it and I thought, well, hang on a minute. I want to use tier 22 set, at least. I'll assume at the moment I would want to use 4-piece tier 20 and 2-piece tier 21. But I'm going to assume that they're going to put the strongest tier set bonus on the 4-piece. So 2-piece tier 20. That meant changing a legendary because on that particular profile, the cloak was a legendary cloak. I switched it for a different legendary instead. And what did I do? I ended up with 35,000 DPS increase, which was 2% increased DPS. So I changed the profile a little bit without increasing the item level. In fact, the item level actually went down a little bit. And I got more DPS. Significantly more DPS. 2% is significant. So then I looked at it again. I said, well, that's still not quite what I would do even with a base profile. This also, bear in mind, isn't taking into account the particularly good pieces I have. Like I mentioned before, I've got an item level 950 tier gloves. I didn't take that into account because the more you actually set it to yourself, personalize it for yourself, the more out of whack you will get with these profiles. So I still said, well, baseline stuff, no Titan Forge or anything like that, no gems, other than sockets that expect to have them in, like legendary rings. But I looked at it and I thought, but if I was going to have the 4-piece tier 21 and 2-piece tier 20, those aren't the pieces I had, because all I actually did was just put the tier 20 into the 2 off-tier slots that the profile had. So I thought, well, I'll mix it around a little bit differently. Still taking the normal 6 set, but just changing which pieces I use for it. And I got more DPS out of it. This time I'm up to now 48,000 more DPS, which is 2.7% increase. And again, as I say, that's not taking into account the actual pieces I have. Now, if I were to do this exercise for every spec, let's say I could, I don't have the expertise to do it, but if I did, or I had the time to ask people who had the expertise in each of these specs what would be a more realistic profile to use with a mixture of Tomb of Sargeras, decent Mythic Plus dungeon gear and Antorus gear, then I might well find that for some specs, actually, do you know what? The Antorus stuff's really good. I'd probably just keep that because the tier 22 set bonus is basically worthless. For some specs, the tier 22 set might be worth even more than it is for the Retribution Paladin, for example. And in terms of the choice of legendaries, again, it might interact with certain set bonuses better, and I'd actually change those around. So you actually find out a complete reordering of those comparison charts anyway. And again, like I remind you from the start, those comparison charts won't actually bear much relation to what actually is produced on Warcraft logs when people are doing this stuff for real, because as I say, an actual boss fight has mechanics in it which will favour certain classes, either based on their defensive skills, the fact that they don't have to move out when someone else does, or based on their movement, or just based on the flexibility of their DPS cooldowns or how they can do their damage. All of these things will play into the reality of a fight that a patchwork sim, or indeed any sim, cannot possibly take account of. So hopefully that's given you some food for thought. If you would like me to do a particular video on any theme explaining anything, then put comments below. If you've enjoyed the video, don't forget to like and subscribe especially. Share it with other people who may be interested, and until next time, I'll see you later.